Hello, guys. Welcome back to the podcast. And as always, I'm very glad that you took the opportunity to join us here today. So, today, what I wanted to talk about was a subject matter that is quite well known within the exploration of self, within metaphysical circles, within spiritual circles. And I guess when I say well known, maybe what I mean more is the term is familiar. I'm not sure really if the phenomenon itself is that well known. And that's really what I would like to do here today is to add to that picture. And that picture that I want to add to is the idea that we call the ego. So, of course, if you use that word, basically, you can approach that idea from a couple of different ways. You can approach it from the way that psychology approaches it, and you can approach it from the way that is typically approached from Eastern spiritual practices. And that's more the direction that I'm going to utilize, or I guess the idea that we're going to utilize as we do a little exploration into this particular phenomenon of your experience here. So, as always, of course, whether it's here on the video podcast channel or on the audio podcast channel, everything that I talk about is really based on the foundational understanding, your movement into a deeper understanding in that way that you are, in fact, the soul, that you're the self, you're the oversoul, you are all that is, you are God, if you want to use that particular word. You're the universe, whatever you would like to say, however you like to phrase it. You are much more than just this seemingly singular expression of yourself, whatever name you give yourself in this moment. And as we talk about ego, of course, we'll come back around to that. So, this understanding that you're more than just your physical body, much, much more than just your physical body, and utilizing whatever means show up at your disposal to come to that deeper understanding is really helpful in that eventually you reach a point, and maybe what you're hearing now is that point, where you begin to understand that when you have this kind of an experience, when you co-create as a huge aspect of all of consciousness in collaboration with other huge aspects of all of consciousness, this kind of a phenomenon, physical reality, this physical reality, when you choose to do that, that is, in fact, what it is. It's a choice. In other words, you're creating many, 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 actually countless things from that perspective of yourself, from what is typically called the oversoul perspective of yourself. Countless things you're creating. This particular experience is one of them because, of course, you, from that perspective, are in fact unlimited. You are infinite. And so you're able to, when you do, create all sorts of things, many, many things that make no sense from your present, quote unquote, physical perspective. But it's important to understand that you're here because you chose to extend, maybe I'll use that word, a part of yourself into this experience to have this kind of experience, right? Because you are, in fact, a creator. You're creating perpetually, infinitely, always. You're never stopping. You're always creating. And you're experiencing your creations, right? It adds to the substance, shall we say, of who and what you are. So this idea is an important idea that you're here intentionally. In other words, you're not here because you messed up someplace. You know, as an infinite being, those things don't happen. You don't trip over your toes and end up in physical reality, tongue-in-cheekly said, of course. So you have to keep in mind that this was your choice, that you would take a part of yourself, create an experience, and then insert this part of yourself into the experience. And of course, we're using terms that make sense from our physical experience here. So insert yourself into this experience to have the experience and all the various and variegated ways that we have these experiences, right? So this is a purposeful thing. And I mention this because there's quite a number of schools of thought that their teachings are that one of the epitomes, shall we say, of moving forward in a deeper understanding of who and what you are is to rid yourself of the ego. Now, if you've explored this subject matter deep enough, and I'm not saying that from that perspective you can't explore deeply, but what you have to understand about the infinite you that you are is that when you're creating yourself in this type of reality in particular, beliefs are incredibly important. They are the primary filter that you filter consciousness through to have your experience. So if you align yourself with a particular school of thought that believes that the only way to make spiritual progress is to somehow divest yourself of the ego, that is what you will try to do. And you will have some experiences that will seem to show you that, in fact, you're making progress there. But what you need to understand about the ego, to give you a larger picture of things, is that the mechanism, and we're going to call it that right now, and we'll expand on that a little later, but the mechanism of the ego allows you to have a physical experience. Without that aspect of the larger you, without that configuration of consciousness, you would not be having this experience. And remember, this experience is an intentional experience. You chose to insert a part of yourself and create around it this experience, to have experiences that you can only have in this kind of an environment, right? This is an intentional experience. So the ego mechanism allows you to do that. It's your interface, shall we say, between the non-physical aspects of you, speaking in more physical terms, of course, the non-physical aspects of you and the physical aspects of you, or maybe we could say the seemingly physical aspects of you, because of course they're not actually physical in the way that within the experience we believe physicality comes about, right? It's very, very different than that. But that's for another podcast, right? You have this mechanism of consciousness that's been termed the ego. And it allows you to have the experience that you're having. Now, that experience and that term, the ego, is something that's utilized in almost all disciplines that begin to look at the deeper nature of who and what you are. But frequently, it's not really expanded on very much, right? Sometimes you don't have a very good idea about what you're really talking about. And so that's really what I'd like to expand upon here a little bit, give you a little better idea about how you're really experiencing this mechanism. How does it show up in your reality, right? What are its qualities, shall we say? Okay. So if you think about maybe going scuba diving, right? If you're going to jump into the ocean and you're going to go down, maybe 150 feet or something like that. If you do that just in your shorts and your t-shirt, first of all, you may find that the environment is a little bit unfriendly and that it may be cold. There might be other things that you experience. And you're probably also going to understand when you're down there that you can't really see your environment very well. You're not having much of an experience down there, right? And so the way that it's typically done now is that there is a suit that you would put on, a wetsuit or a dry suit, depending on how far you're going to go, how deep you're going to go, maybe the temperature of the water as well. And then you have a face mask that you put on, or a helmet, right? Something that allows you to actually perceive your environment in a way that makes the experience worthwhile, right? So your goggles or your mask allow you to see when you go under the water in a very clear way, right? It allows you to have the perception of what's going on, to have the experience in a way that makes the experience in that term worthwhile for you. It's kind of what the ego is like, right? It's your interface between your deeper experience of self and this experience of who you are. It allows this experience to occur, right? So, in that, what are the qualities that the ego has? What is that interface between those deeper parts of you and the part of you that's having the experience? So, in basic terms, and we'll start there and then we'll expand a little bit, the ego is made up of all the things that are relatively unique to this experience, to your quote unquote physical seeming experience. In the deepest way, we're talking about beliefs and definitions, right? So we've talked, especially in the audio podcast, about beliefs and the nature of beliefs and how beliefs are such a powerful tool, such a powerful filter, such a powerful configurer of your experience in physical reality. Okay, so those are part of what your ego is. Your emotional and feeling states are part of what your ego is. The thought processes, which are your interpretations and translations of the information that you have at your disposal at any particular moment, those are what your thoughts are. Your thoughts are that. But also, what your ego entails is your personality. And of course, your personality is about all of those things, right? All the things that seemingly make up who you believe you are while you are going about your physical experience of reality. That's your personality, right? The gender that you identify yourself with, the hair color that you have, the weight that you have, the way that you speak, the home that you have, the job that you have, because you're interacting in a particular way in all of those situations and through all those situations, right? So they're associated with who you believe that you are, right? The family that you came from, maybe the culture that you came from, right? The various places that your family may have come from before they ended up wherever you are right now, right? The information that you have from school, right? All of these various things that seemingly make up to you who you are components of your personality. And they're also components of your ego, right? They are a construct, shall we say. They are ideas in that regard that you have chosen of all the different ideas you have around you, because there's many different ways that you could look. There's many different ways that your eye color could be, that your hair color could be. There's many different schools you could have gone to. There's many different jobs that you might have. There's many different types of relationships you may be having. There's many different ways you can look at the world around you. So many different permutations, right? So all of these things become part of your personality. All of these things are part of the interface then that the deeper you experiences this experience of physical reality through is all of those aspects of who and what you are. That's your ego. Now, if you think back to all of those things, many of those things are very, very flexible and very changeable, right? Some change at a slower rate, some change at a more rapid rate, right? School can change rapidly, especially if you're, well, it doesn't really make any difference where you are. Things can happen differently day to day to day, sometimes within the hours as the day goes by when you're in school or any place, right? Things are always happening in your existence that change the way that maybe you may look at something differently than what you did just a few moments before, right? And so in that, what happens is that the personality changes and the ego changes. So the ego is not just this one strongly held way of looking at things. It's a very malleable experience and process, right? Because the personality is very malleable, right? The ideas of the thoughts that you have, right? The actions that you take as a response to the feeling and emotional states that you have, and the other forms of information that you have at your disposal, all of those flowing from the beliefs that you have about yourself and about your reality at any particular moment, right? So it's this package, this very flexible, movable, malleable package. This, in fact, is what your ego is all about. That is the interface that you're having this experience through. Now, you can change many, many aspects of those things, right? Of course, it's easy enough to change your hair color. You just go out and get a packet of dye and you change your hair color, right? But when we're talking about changing you, the way that you see things, that can happen at a relatively rapid rate sometimes. Sometimes it happens a little bit more slowly, but you can change your beliefs. You can choose to utilize different beliefs within the substance of yourself, within the substance of, maybe we can say, your mind at this moment, right? Or the imagination or dream time, whatever levels you'd like to talk about, the template level reality, the blueprint level reality. There's many, many terms that you could use, but you can choose to use different beliefs. And sometimes that happens quite rapidly. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. When you were very young, if you learned to ride a bike, there was a time before that happened where you believed you could not ride a bike. And then you had this process occur. And through that process, by the time that process was over, now you had a different belief. You were utilizing a different belief, because all beliefs are within you. You now had a belief that you could ride a bike. In this country, which is the United States, if you were very young, you may have believed in this character, this expression called the Easter Bunny, right? In your teens, 20s, 30s, and beyond, you no longer believe in the Easter Bunny. You've changed your belief systems. Santa Claus is the same way, right? It's different. You may, when you were very young, depending on the country you're in, you may have held a very strong idea, a very strong belief. You may have trusted very strongly in a particular way of expressing yourself politically. And as you grew in age and as you started to do different things in your life, maybe that shifted. And now you hold a very strong opinion in a different direction, right? So those beliefs change. There's all sorts of beliefs around the world, all sorts of beliefs that you utilize as part of your experience. And they're all very, in that sense, malleable. In other words, you're free to choose amongst them. So in that, those filters, beliefs, are, again, probably the most powerful interpreters, shall we say, translators, right? Configurers of your consciousness as it is then experienced around you as the experience that you have. So in that, again, the ego is integral to having that experience. The only time you, in these terms, get rid of the ego is when you leave this experience, right? When you, quote unquote, die and you move out of physical reality and you once again have the experience of yourself, as soul, as the oversoul, whatever you'd like to say, you don't need that interface any longer. At that point, you no longer have ego. It's a much different situation now. It's not about beliefs either. There are no beliefs in that situation because you create instantaneously in that particular environment, right? There is no lag period. There's no process like you have here. You just create moment by moment. Whatever you want to experience, you experience. There is no process involved. You're just having that experience. Here, it's very different. And because it's very different, it's one of the reasons why we so strongly actually like and embrace this experience from outside of the experience, right? Now, from within the experience sometimes, because it can be quite challenging, because we knew, of course, it was going to be quite challenging. I mean, if you go from a place where you have total awareness of yourself and your infinite ability to create it any way you want to, and you change that from that experience to this experience that seems like you're cut off from that awareness of yourself, like it is very difficult to create, like it takes these long processes to create, and all the other things that go along with this experience of physical reality, sometimes frequently, sometimes not so frequently. Again, it depends on the person, it depends on the time period, it depends on the country that you're in, so many things, right? Okay. So, but the types of experiences that we can have within what we call physical experience cannot be had once we divest ourselves of the ego through the process of death. Because then again, there is no process, right? There is no unfolding in terms of this thing called time once you leave all of this behind, quote unquote. And by that, what I mean is that when you become re-familiar with who and what you actually are, it's not that these experiences go away or these ideas of you or any of the personalities of you go away. They're always there, but you're having a different experience now. It's like if you leave your home and you go on vacation, let's say you fly across an ocean someplace and you're going on vacation there. It's not that your home doesn't still exist. It's that you're out having a different experience now. It's the same thing when you leave this experience and you expand yourself back into who and what you are. The other experience still exists, right? In a particular way, shape, and form within consciousness and energy, right? But now you're having a different experience, right? All of what's within creation always exists. Nothing ever goes out of existence, right? It's just interacted with in a different way from your perspective. So these are the things that you want to keep in mind as far as the ego is concerned. Primarily, it's a mechanism of your consciousness that you utilize in a particular way to have a particular type of an experience. This kind of an experience. It's a purposeful experience. You wanted to have this experience. This experience is not a mistake. There's nothing wrong with your ego. Your ego is your personality. Now, can you change your personality? Can through many different ways, can you become increasingly familiar of who and what you are? Absolutely. You can become incredibly familiar with who and what you are. This again, however, helps you to understand the flexibility and the malleability of the ego. Because as long as you are still experiencing some physical reality, even as you grow yourself, we'll just say that, become increasingly aware of those larger aspects of yourself and utilize those within the experience. If you're still in the experience, you're still utilizing the mechanism of the ego to have the experience because you're still utilizing the interface to have an experience within this idea of physical reality, right? So you haven't, even in those stages, divested yourself of the ego, or there may be like a back and forth that goes on, right? Where sometimes you pull away and sometimes you pop back in. We'll just say it like that. And so you're using the ego a little bit, then you move away from that. You're not using the ego, and then you move back, right? But the individuals that you're interacting with in physical reality are not going to notice that, right? You may have that experience, they will not, right? And so again, there's a lot of permutations about how you can do that. But just know that if you're having a physical experience, you need the ego. That's what it's about. It's about having the physical experience, right? And again, physicality is not a mistake. It's not something bad. It's not something to try to get away from. It's something to understand. It's something to grow your awareness within so that you can utilize the experience in a different way. But you're still going to be using the ego. You're still going to be using that mechanism of consciousness, which is meant to provide this interface between the non-physical, quote unquote, parts of you and the physical, quote unquote, parts of you, right? So you can have this particular experience. So depending on things that you've heard about the ego in the past, this may be something quite new for you. So again, I've explored all these things for about 3 decades now, about 30 years. And there's a lot of information that you begin to become familiar with as you increase the exploration that you've had. Now, of course, in this time period, this transitional time period, this shifting time period, things can go much more rapidly than what they did when I first began my process. Even though when I began my process, I was in the earlier anyway, stages, not the earliest stages, but the earlier stages of this process that's going on right now, because it hasn't been just a small process of 10 or 20 years. It's been a longer process, right? It began longer ago than you may understand, because there was a foundation to be built and all that. Okay. But the concept to understand is that you exist in this experience and you exist as the rest of you at the same time, simultaneously. So in that regard, there's really no place to go. And even in a more comprehensive way, understanding things, really, you haven't gone anywhere. You have this seemingly physical experience within the substance of yourself, within the substance of you as a soul, you as the oversoul. This happens within you because within consciousness, there is no outside of consciousness. Everything is consciousness. And because you are all of consciousness expressing itself in seemingly, shall we say, um, unique ways, right? Because you can do that. That's what the soul is all about. That's what the oversoul is about, is a unique expression of consciousness. And you're doing that all the time. But there is no outside of consciousness. So when we talk about physical reality, you really need to talk about the experience of physical reality, right? Because you haven't gone anyplace. You create this experience within the substance of who and what you are as consciousness, who and what you are as a soul or the oversoul. As you do that, you create a variety of different mechanisms of how consciousness expresses itself so that you can have these experiences. One of the most important one of those, or they're all important, but one of the very important one of those is the mechanism of the ego and what it actually allows you to do here. So again, it's not something to get rid of. It's not something to walk beyond. It is something to understand. And as you move into a deep understanding of yourself, you'll begin to understand that mechanism for what it actually is. And you'll begin to use it in a much more flexible way than what you've allowed yourself to use it before. Again, remember the power of beliefs in this particular type of an experience, our physical experience. We use beliefs in a very strong and powerful way here. So if you believe this thing called the ego is limiting your ability here within physical reality, that's going to be the effect that you're going to have, right? Because it's all about beliefs. Beliefs are the filter that you use to configure the reality that you perceive around you, seemingly around you. Okay. So keep that in mind as well, right? It's very powerful, right? In a sense, when you create this reality, foundationally speaking, the reality in and of itself is neutral. And what I mean by neutral is that it has no meaning. The meaning that it has is the meaning that you give it. And in each moment, what you're doing is you're giving your reality meaning, right? Through all the various things that we talked about before, for all the beliefs that you have about all the various things, for all the definitions that you have about all the various things that you're doing, about yourself, about all the individuals that you interact with, about all those various aspects of the world that you interact with, right? You provide all that meaning in that moment. As moment by moment by moment goes by, you're providing the meaning to your reality. So you, in this expression and in the rest of you, are the reason why this experience for you occurs, right? You're the most powerful aspect of why and how you're having your experience. Understanding all the various mechanisms about why that's true and how that occurs is a very powerful thing to be able to do for yourself as you open your awareness to understand more of who you are in this experience. Understanding as part of that part of that mechanism that we've termed the ego is a very important part of this concept. It's a very important part of having this experience. In fact, without that mechanism, you don't have what we call physical experience. It doesn't happen. It is integral. It's the interface, again, between the non-physical you and what seems to be the physical experience. So I think we'll leave it there. That's probably enough for you to think about for a while, explore for a while, go within yourself and ask you to fill those ideas out for yourself. And certainly that can happen. So I hope, again, that your exploration is going very nicely, that you're becoming increasingly aware at whatever rate that you're utilizing of that larger picture of who and what you are. And so for now, we'll say goodbye, and I'll see you at some later date. Take care.